What will we be learning during our study of Mark? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we begin our study of the book of Mark on Walking Through the Bible.
Wonders of his word, the glory of his cross.
In today's episode, we return again to the New Testament and begin the fourth study of our walk through the Bible, a study of the book of Mark. All told, it will take us 70 episodes to cover this book, with each episode being between 5 to 7 minutes in length. We hope you'll join us for each episode of this study. Mark is the second book of the New Testament and is also the second book in the section of the New Testament sometimes referred to as the Gospels. Like Matthew, Mark presents us with a biography of the life, teaching, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. We're going to see and note that many of the stories contained in Mark are also found in Matthew, but there will be some stories that won't be. As we said when we studied Matthew, we need to beware not to take Mark's biography of Jesus as a chronology, for the discussion is never presented as such. Therefore, if Mark presents an order of events that differs from Matthew's, we shouldn't think of this as a contradiction, but just a different way to tell the same story. The author of the book of Mark is a man named Mark. This Mark would be the one referred to in Acts 12 and 25. He is also known as John, whose surname is Mark, or John called Mark, as Acts 15:37 says, or simply John, as Acts 13:5 and 13 says. Mark was a Jew whose mother, Mary, was a resident of Jerusalem and a member of the church there after the church was established on the day of Pentecost. While he was young, he was a traveling companion of Paul and Barnabas on their first missionary journey, though on that trip he decided to leave and to return to Jerusalem. This decision would later cause Paul and Barnabas to part ways on their second journey, with Barnabas taking Mark with him, while Paul taking Silas and going somewhere else. Later on in Paul's life, it is evident that Mark had matured and Paul had forgiven him. For in 2 Timothy 4, verse 11, Paul tells Timothy to bring Mark with him, for he would be useful to Paul. Now you might ask, even though the book's title is Mark, how do I know that Mark is the author and not somebody else who just put Mark's name on the book? Well, for one, the early non-biblical writings would support Mark as the author, something that should carry weight because they were there while we were not. There also is a passage in Mark 14:51 and 52, which would make it seem as if Mark, who would be a young man during Jesus' lifetime, was an eyewitness of the arrest of Jesus. This young man wasn't identified, which makes it a possibility that it is Mark. For like the Apostle John, he wouldn't identify himself in his writings about Jesus, for Mark wasn't to be the focus of this book. Jesus was. As to where Mark would get some of his source material, we of course believe that Mark was inspired of the Holy Spirit, who could have given him all the information needed without prior direct knowledge. But seeing as how there is biblical evidence that Mark was close with the Apostle Peter, it is quite possible that Mark would have gained knowledge of Jesus' private conversations from him, and under the directions of the Holy Spirit, recorded what he had heard and what the Holy Spirit wanted revealed. As to when the book was written, dates are always speculative, but there are a couple of markers that would give us some clues as to the date. Mark would not have been a young man when he wrote this. He would have been more mature, so that would preclude a date closer to the time of Jesus. Mark mentions the sons of Simon of Cyrene, the man who bore Jesus' cross. That would tell us that these sons must have been alive and well known to his readers, or else why mention them? This would place the book sometime in the middle of the first century. However, Mark also mentions the prophecies about the destruction of Jerusalem as something yet in the future, which means it was written before 70 A.D. Therefore, an educated guess would place this book in the range of 60 to 69 A.D., with 60 to 67 A.D. appearing very likely. Now that we have an approximate time frame, the last question we should consider is, why did Mark write this book? What is he trying to tell us? The first thing you'll notice is that unlike Matthew, Mark does not start with Jesus' birth. He doesn't even mention the events surrounding Jesus' birth. He begins with the time period around the start of Jesus' ministry. That's because Mark has a different focus than Matthew. If you recall, Matthew's main purpose is to show the Jews that Jesus was the King of the Jews, the Messiah foretold in prophecy. One of those prophecies would have been the virgin birth, hence why Matthew includes it. However, verse 1 of Mark 1 gives us Mark's focus. He is presenting us with evidence that Jesus is the Son of God, who has power and absolute authority. It's not that Matthew didn't show us some of that too, but Mark really emphasizes this. Mark also portrays Jesus as the servant of God who had come into the world in order to serve mankind by giving his life to save the lost. These two ideas will run through Mark, and we should keep this in mind as we study the book. Why would Mark need to do this? Well, because his audience is different to that of Matthew. Matthew was originally written to the Jews, hence the many references to prophecy. Mark, on the other hand, was originally written to a Roman audience, as is seen by the use of Latin terms instead of Greek words in some places, his use of Latin terms to explain Greek words, and the explanations made by him of the geography and customs of Palestine and the Jews, something that would not have needed to be done if he was originally writing to a Jewish audience. Regardless of the original audience, though, this book is applicable to us today, no matter what culture we're from, because it identifies to us who Jesus is, what he taught, and what we need to do to obey him. Overall, then, this will be an interesting study, one that I hope you'll join us for. With that, our time is up for today, Lord, when we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Mark chapter 1, verses 1 to 13, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.